11 people, 4 states, 3 years. On paper, they had almost nothing in common. A NASA materials scientist, a retired Air Force general, fusion physicist at MIT, an astrophysicist who spent his nights mapping the asteroids that might one day hit us. A woman who spent her career chasing anti-gravity in a lab outside Huntsville. Different cities, different fields. Kind of people who would never have met at a dinner party. But they were all working on, or near, the same thing. Classified programs, defense contracts, the hidden edge of aerospace research where the budgets disappear into black ink and the paperwork stops existing. And between 2022 and 2026, one by one, they vanished. Some walked out of their own front doors on foot and were never seen again. Some were shot on their porches. One was pulled out of a lake. One simply stopped existing in the public record, as if a hand had reached down and quietly erased her. The news covered them as separate stories. A missing hiker here, a workplace tragedy there, a random act of violence somewhere else. 11 unrelated headlines, scattered across the country, never printed on the same page. When you line them up, side by side in order, something happens. The randomness falls away. And what's left underneath is a shape. Pattern that, 40 years ago, another government on another continent looked at and called, their words statistically incredible. This is the story of the people who got too close. And the question nobody in an official position seems willing to answer out loud. What were they all working on? And who decided they had to stop? Let me lay out the shape of this before we get into the names, because the shape is the entire point. Start the clock in the summer of 2022 and run it forward to the spring of 2026. In that window, at least 11 American scientists, engineers, contractors, and government officials connected to classified defense, aerospace, or UAP research either disappeared without a trace or turned dead. UAP, for anyone new to the term, the government now calls UFOs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. The language changed, the subject didn't. Now people die. People go missing. In a country of 330 million, tragedy is constant background noise. If I showed you 11 random deaths, you'd shrug, and you'd be right to. But these weren't random. Watch what they have in common. The methods repeat. In one cluster of cases, person walks away from their life on foot, leaving the car, leaving the phone, leaving the wallet, leaving every single thing that could be tracked and is simply never found. In another cluster, the person is killed at home, at their door, by a stranger with a thin or nonsensical motive. And in nearly every case, the institution they worked for goes quiet. Cause of death is delayed or never released, and the local police close the file as fast as they politely can, 11 times, across 4 years. In the same narrow professional world, the mainstream explanation is coincidence. 11 coincidences, stacked on top of each other, in the exact group of people who knew the country's most guarded secrets. I'm going to walk you through every one of them, and then show you that this has happened before, almost beat, and that the last time, it took a foreign parliament to admit something was wrong. Let's start with the woman who went up a mountain and didn't come down. Case 1, Reza. On the morning of June 22, 2025, Reza drove to the trailhead at Mount Waterman in the San Gabriel Range north of Los Angeles. It was a clear day. She was an experienced hiker. She knew the route. She parked. She locked the car. She started up the trail, and that is the last verifiable fact anyone has about Reza. When she didn't come home that night, her family called it in. By the next morning, search and rescue teams were on the mountain. This wasn't a small effort. Helicopters, drones with thermal cameras, scent dogs, dozens of trained searchers walking grid patterns across terrain they knew intimately. They found one thing, Beanie. Hers sitting off the trail as if it had been set down rather than dropped. And then nothing, no body, no clothing, no sign of a fall, animal a struggle. The scent dogs, the ones trained to follow a human trail for miles, lost her almost immediately. Not faded, not confused, stopped. As if the trail she was leaving simply ended in open air. There's one more detail, and it's the kind of detail that I almost left out, because it sounds like something from a campfire story. During the search, more than one person on that mountain reported hearing a scream. A single, drawn-out, anguished human scream coming from a direction where the searchers had already been. They swept it, nothing was there now. If this were just a missing hiker, it would be a tragedy and nothing more. Mountains take people every year, but Reza was not just a hiker. And to understand why her name belongs on this list, you have to know what she did for a living. Before we get to her work, I have to point something out. Because if you've spent any time in this corner of the internet, you're already thinking it. Reza disappearance checks nearly every box on what's known as the Missing 4-1 profile. The catalog assembled by former police investigator David, polities of hundreds of people who vanished in wilderness areas under conditions that don't fit the normal patterns of getting lost. The hallmarks are weirdly consistent: experienced outdoors people, clear weather, scent dogs that can't find a trail, belongings left in strange, deliberate-looking places, a body that's either never recovered or turns up somewhere already searched. Reza fit the profile so cleanly that, first, that's the box people put her in. But Paulides himself has always been careful to say his catalog is a description, not an explanation. It's a list of cases that don't add up. It doesn't tell you why. And here's where Monica Reza stops being a 411 statistic and becomes something else. The other people on the 411 list were hikers, hunters, kids. Monica Reza held a security clearance. She worked on the engines that put American payloads into orbit. The mountain didn't pick her at random. Almost nothing in this story is. Monica Reza was a materials scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. If you don't know JPL, here's the short version. It's where the United States designs the robots it sends to other planets. The Mars rovers, the deep space probes, hardware that has to survive launch forces, hard vacuum, and temperatures that would shatter ordinary metal. And the people who make that hardware possible are the materials scientists, the ones who invent the alloys that don't exist anywhere in nature. Reza was one of them. And according to the people who knew her work, she had developed something new, a superalloy, a metal engineered to hold its strength under the kind of heat and stress that destroys conventional materials. The exact specifications were not public, which itself tells you something about who was funding the work. Now here's where it gets geopolitical. For years, the United States bought a critical piece of its rocket hardware, the RD-180 engine, from Russia. National security satellites were going up on Russian-built engines. When relations collapsed, the supply line became a vulnerability the Pentagon could not tolerate, and the race was on to build domestic engines that could exceed Russian performance. That race runs directly through the kind of high-temperature alloy Monica Reza was developing. Her funding, when you follow it back, doesn't stop at NASA. It threads through Air Force research budgets, and it brushes up against a name we are going to come back to again and again before this is over: a retired general named William Neal McCasland, a materials scientist working on the metal that lets American rockets break free of Russian engines, walks up a mountain and dissolves into thin air. The first threat, hold on to it. Case 2, Anthony Chavez move east to New Mexico, to Los Alamos. You know the name even if you don't know the town. Los Alamos National Laboratory is where the atomic bomb was born, and 80 years later, it's still one of the most secure scientific facilities on the planet. The people who work there are vetted, cleared, watched, counted. Anthony Chavez was one of those people, a retired Los Alamos scientist, kind of man whose name appears on no public paper because everything he touched was classified. Around May 4th, 2025, Anthony Chavez left. Not left as in resigned, left as in walked out of his life and didn't return. His belongings stayed behind. Pattern that's about to become exhaustingly familiar starts right here with him. He didn't take the things a person takes when they choose to disappear. He took nothing that would help anyone, or anything, follow him. And no one followed him, because there was no trail to follow. He was never found. One missing Los Alamos scientist is a tragedy that a small town absorbs and grieves. But Anthony Chavez was not the only one. 7 weeks later, in the same town, it happened again. Case 3, Melissa Cassius, June 26, 2025. Los Alamos again. Melissa Cassius was a cleared employee at the laboratory. Cleared, meaning she'd passed the background investigations, meaning she had access to compartments of information that most people with security clearances aren't even allowed to know exist. On June 26th, she vanished. And this is where the cases stop feeling like a string of bad luck and start feeling engineered because of two details. The first, her security badge. The badge that controls access to the laboratory, that logs every door she opens, ties her physical body to a digital record. It went missing with her. Or rather, it stopped reporting. The electronic trail simply ended. Second detail is the one that should make the hair on your arms stand up: her phone. When investigators went looking at her devices, they found that her phone had been factory reset, wiped, returned to the blank condition it was in the day it left the store. Every message, every call log, every location ping, gone deliberately, cleanly, completely. People who vanish by accident don't wipe their phones. People who vanish on purpose, to start a new life, take their money and their car. Melissa Cassius did neither. She left everything that proved who she was, and erased everything that recorded where she'd been. 2 cleared Los Alamos employees. 7 weeks apart, same town, same method, and it wasn't finished. Case 4, Stephen Garcia, August 28, 2025. This time the location shifts to Kansas City, to a facility most Americans have never heard of, the National Security Campus. Kansas City National Security Campus is where the non-nuclear components of America's nuclear weapons are manufactured. Roughly 80% of the parts that go into the country's warheads, the electronics, the mechanical pieces, the engineering, come out of that campus. It is by any measure one of the most sensitive industrial sites in the United States. Stephen Garcia was a contractor there. On August 28th, in the middle of his life, Stephen Garcia walked away. He left his belongings. This detail matters. He was carrying a handgun when he went. That's it. He left everything traceable, kept the one thing that suggests fear, and disappeared into the same silence as the others. I want to stop here for a second, because we now have 4 cases, and I want you to feel what I felt when I lined them up. 4 people, 4 sensitive sites: Reza at JPL, Chavez and Casillas at Los Alamos, Garcia at the Kansas City nuclear campus. And in every single case, the disappearance follows the same script, like it was copied from the same instruction sheet. The person leaves on foot, they leave the car, they leave the wallet, they leave the phone, and in at least one case, they wipe it first. They leave behind everything that the modern world uses to find a human being, and they walk into an absence so total that trained search teams, helicopters, and dogs come back with nothing. Think about how hard that actually is. We live inside a surveillance net. Cameras, cell towers, license plate readers, satellites, vanishing completely, leaving no digital ghost at all, is something even sophisticated criminals struggle to do. And yet here are 4 ordinary scientists and contractors pulling it off perfectly, independently, within months of each other, in the same professional world. Either 4 strangers all spontaneously executed a flawless vanishing, or someone who knew exactly how to make a person disappear did it to them 4 times and made it look like a choice. I'll let you sit with which of those is more likely. And then let's keep going, because the method is about to change. Case 5, Jason Thomas, December 12, 2025, Massachusetts. Jason Thomas was a research director at Novartis, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. His work was in cancer research, the leading edge of it, kind of biological science that overlaps with fields the defense world cares about more than the public realizes. On December 12th, Jason Thomas walked out. For days there was nothing. The same silence, the same absence. And then the silence broke in the worst possible way. His body was recovered from Lake Quinsigamond, a long, narrow lake on the edge of Worcester. No clear explanation, no note that resolved anything. A scientist walks away from his life in the middle of December, and days later he's pulled out of cold water and the file is closed. If this were the only case, you'd call it a private tragedy and look away out of respect. But it isn't the only case. It's the 5th. 3 days after they pulled Jason Thomas out of that lake, the method changed again. And this time it wasn't quiet. Case 6. Nuno Lareo, December 15, 2025, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Nuno Lareo was not a minor figure. He was the director of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center, one of the most important fusion research institutions in the country, holding contracts with the Department of Energy. Fusion is the holy grail, limitless, clean energy, yes, but also a field with deep, classified overlaps into advanced propulsion and weapons physics. The director of a center like that knows things. On December 15th, Nuno Loureiro was shot at the door of his home. Now, there was a story attached to this one, and I want to give it to you straight because it's the kind of story that's designed to make you stop asking questions. The man accused in the shooting had a backstory, a grievance, a history, a connection that reached back to his time at Brown University, a college grudge, a lone, troubled individual. The narrative practically writes itself, and the moment you accept it, the case becomes ordinary. A personal dispute, nothing to see. Maybe that's exactly what it was. But here's what I keep coming back to. We now have the director of an MIT fusion center, shot dead at his own front door, 3 days after a pharmaceutical research director was pulled out of a lake, in the same state, in the same week. And we're supposed to file them in 2 completely different drawers. One a suicide, one a grudge, and never let them touch. 2 months later, the shooting started again, on the other side of the country. Case 7. Carl Grillmeier, February 16, 2026, Southern California. Carl Grillmeier was an astrophysicist at Caltech, deeply involved in a NASA mission called NEO-Surveyor, the project designed to find the near-Earth objects, the asteroids and comets, that could one day threaten the planet. His job, put simply, was to watch the sky for things coming toward us. On February 16, 2026, Carl Grillmeier was shot on the porch of his own home. The man arrested for it was named Freddie Snyder. And I'll be honest with you here, the way I try to be honest throughout this. On its face, this looks like a random act of violence. A man on his porch, a stranger with a gun. It happens in this country with a frequency that should shame us. Taken alone, there is nothing about the Grillmeier shooting that screams conspiracy. But that's the whole trick of this story, isn't it? Taken alone, none of these scream anything. The missing hiker taken alone is a mountain accident. The lake taken alone is a private grief. The MIT director Taken alone is a grudge. The astrophysicist taken alone is American gun violence. It's only when you stop taking them alone that the floor drops out. Because Carl Grillmare was a Caltech scientist, and Caltech runs JPL. And we have now had more than one death inside that single institutional family, cases 8 and 9, the JPL deaths. Let me take you back to JPL. Monica Reza was not the only one. Michael David Hicks, a scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, died in 2023. Cause of death, not released. Frank Maywald, also connected to JPL, died in 2024. Cause of death, not released. I want to be careful here. 2 scientists at a large institution dying across 2 years is not by itself alarming. But notice the through line. Hicks in 2023, Maywald in 2024, Reza vanishing off a mountain in 2025. 3 deaths or disappearances tied to one laboratory in 3 consecutive years, and in 2 of the 3, institution that knows exactly what happened decided the public did not need to know the cause. That's the part I can't move past. The deaths alone, the silence around them. When an ordinary person dies, there's a cause on a certificate, and it's a matter of record. When these people die, a door closes. 3 at JPL. And we still haven't reached the name that ties the entire web together. Biggest name on the list. A man whose disappearance made even the people who scoff at all of this stop and go quiet. Case 10, William Neal McCasland, retired Air Force Major General William Neal McCasland. Understand why his name matters more than all the others combined. You have to understand his career. McCasland wasn't a contractor or a lab tech. He was a commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory, the AFRL, the organization responsible for the most advanced research the United States Air Force conducts. He spent years at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. And if you know one thing about Wright-Patterson, you know the legend that's clung to it since 1947, that when something came down near Roswell, New Mexico, wreckage and whatever was in it was taken to Wright-Patterson, Hangar 18. The most enduring rumor in the entire history of the subject. And William Neal McCasland sat near the top of the organization that the rumor revolves around. It gets more specific than rumor, though. McCasland's name surfaces in the WikiLeaks releases, in leaked emails involving John Podesta, Washington power broker with a famous personal interest in UAP disclosure, and Tom DeLonge, musician who reinvented himself as a go-between for insiders trying to bring the subject into the open. In those emails, McCasland is named, by people on the inside, as a person who knew about recovered material. A person, allegedly, with access to the actual hardware. Sit with that. A retired general, tied by leaked correspondence to the single most sensitive secret the conspiracy world believes exists. And on February 27, 2026, William Neal McCasland disappeared. Here's why the timing of McCasland's disappearance stops me cold. Because it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened during a stretch of weeks when the entire subject of UAP disclosure was lurching forward in public. Just days before, on February 19, 2026, there had been a directive at the highest level of government regarding UAP files. Real pressure to bring classified material into the light. The machinery of disclosure was finally grinding into motion. And at the exact same moment, things on the other side started locking down. Freedom of Information Act request for dozens of Navy UAP photographs, 78 images, was denied. And one of the longest-running civilian archives of government UAP documents, a repository known as the Black Vault, suffered a server wipe, calendar side by side, disclosure pressure rising, records being denied and erased. And in the middle of it, one retired general allegedly tied to the recovered material walks out his door and disappears. I'm not telling you what that means. I'm telling you those events sat on the same few pages of the same calendar. The search for William Neal McCasland was not quiet, and it was not small. Investigators canvassed something on the order of 700 homes. 700. That is not how you look for a man who wandered off and got confused. That is how you look for someone when you are deeply, institutionally afraid of what his disappearance means. There was a 911 call connected to the case in which someone used a chilling phrase, that it seemed deliberate. One theory had him going up into the Sandia Mountains, vanishing the way the others vanished on foot. And there was controversy over whether a public alert, the kind that might have mobilized ordinary citizens to look, was issued quickly enough, quietly suppressed. And the journalist Ross Coulthart, who has spent years on this subject and does not spook easily, looked at the McCasland disappearance and called it what he believed it was, a national security crisis. Not a missing persons case, a crisis. When a man with that resume tied to those secrets disappears in the middle of a disclosure fight, and the people who investigate it use words like deliberate and crisis, you've left the world of coincidence behind. So let me stop adding cases for a moment and show you the thing underneath them, the web. Lay them all out on a table. Monica Reza, JPL. Michael Hicks, JPL. Frank Maywell, JPL. Carl Grillmare, Caltech, which runs JPL. That's one cluster, all bound to a single institution. Anthony Chavez, Los Alamos. Melissa Cassius, Los Alamos. Stephen Garcia, the Kansas City Nuclear Campus. That's the Nuclear Weapons Cluster. All bound to the Department of Energy's most sensitive sites, Nuno Loureiro. MIT Fusion. Also funded through the Department of Energy. Jason Thomas, Novartis Advanced Biological Research, and presiding over a huge swath of it through Air Force research funding that touches the propulsion and materials work through Wright-Patterson, through the leaked emails, William Neal McCasland. This is not 11 random people. This is a network. Pull on any single thread, the funding, clearances, the institutions, the fields of study, and you find it connects to the others. They were not strangers selected by chance. They were nodes on the same map. The people who work where America's classified science meets its most guarded secrets now. If this were the first time in history that a tight cluster of defense scientists died strange deaths in a short window, you could still argue it away. You could call it grim luck, but it isn't the first time. It happened before, almost exactly like this. And the last time, a government had to answer for it. Travel back to Britain, to the 1980s. G.C. Marconi was a British defense electronics giant, the company building the guidance systems, the radar, secret electronic warfare technology at the heart of the Cold War. And between roughly 1982 and 1990, the scientists and engineers who worked for Marconi and its associated defense projects began to die. Not one or two, more than 25 of them. The deaths were bizarre. That's not my word, it's the word that came up again and again at the time. One scientist, Vimal Dajibai, found dead beneath a bridge. Another, Ashad Sharif, died in a way that strained belief, reportedly tying a rope around his own neck, attaching it to a tree, and then driving his car forward. David Sands drove a car loaded with fuel cans, straight into a brick wall at high speed, name after name after name. Defense scientists working on classified British and Allied programs, dying in ways ruled suicides or accidents, but that, stacked together, formed a column too tall to ignore. A journalist named Tony Collins investigated the cluster and wrote a book about it, Open, Verdict, laying the deaths side by side the way I'm laying these out for you now. The pattern became so impossible to dismiss that it reached Parliament itself. Members of the British government raised it on the floor. The phrase that came out of that scrutiny, statistically incredible, was the establishment's own admission that the math didn't work. Prime Minister at the time, Margaret Thatcher, was asked about it. The official posture, in the end, was the one we always come back to. Coincidence, unrelated, nothing to connect. More than 25 defense scientists, one company, 8 years, and the answer was pay no attention. 40 years later, 11 American scientists, same fields, same silence, same word offered to explain it. The pattern didn't go away. Crossed an ocean and waited. Case 11, Amy Escridge, the first. I saved one name for last. Not because it happened last, because it happened first, and because of what she said before it did. Amy Escridge was an anti-gravity researcher based out of Huntsville, Alabama, Rocket City, the heart of American aerospace. Her field was the field that sits right at the edge of science fiction. Propulsion without propellant. Field effects. The physics that, if it's real, would rewrite everything about how things move through space. She worked in the lineage of researchers like Ning Li, a physicist whose anti-gravity work drew serious attention and then abruptly drew silence. And Amy Escridge did something almost no one in her position does. She talked on camera. She warned in plain language. Scientists in her field, the anti-gravity field, the propulsion field, were being silenced. That the work was dangerous to do, not because it might fail, but because it might succeed. She described a strategy she was relying on to stay safe, and it's the most haunting thing in this entire story. Her plan for survival was visibility. Be public, be known, be on the record. As the people who disappear are the ones nobody is watching. She believed that being seen would protect her. Amy Escridge died on June 11th, 2022. She was the first, the one whose death opens the window that all the others fall through. And the warning she gave on camera, that researchers in her field were being silenced, reads now less like paranoia and more like a woman describing the machine that was about to come for her. Visibility didn't save her. The date on her death means the clock on all of this started a full year earlier than the headlines ever suggested. Here's what makes this different from every UFO story you've ever rolled your eyes at. This time, the acknowledgement came from inside the building. There was recognition at the level of the White House that something here was serious. Public comments, including the blunt assessment that this was, quote, pretty serious stuff, not from a podcaster, from the top. And then there's Congressman Tim Burchett, one of the loudest voices in Washington, demanding answers on the UAP question. Perch looked at this pattern and said the part politicians are trained never to say, that he didn't believe in the coincidences, and, fittingly, that he wanted it on the record that he was not suicidal, that if something happened to him, no one should accept the easy explanation. Think about what it means for a sitting member of Congress to feel he has to preemptively deny his own future suicide. That is a man who looked at this same list and decided he needed an alibi against his own death. When the people with security briefings and subpoena power are this uneasy, the crazy conspiracy theory framing stops holding together. Now let me do the thing that the people who dismiss all of this never do. Let me argue against myself, because if I'm going to ask you to take the pattern seriously, I owe you honesty about its weak points. Not every case on this list is equally strong. Jason Thomas, the Novartis director, pulled from the lake. I think there's a real chance that one is exactly what it looks like. A private tragedy, folded into the pattern because it happened in the same window. The same goes, honestly, for Carl Grillmeyer, the astrophysicist on his porch. Random violence is real, and it's common, and if you handed me only that case, I would not cry conspiracy. And the Grillmeyer shooter, Freddie Snyder, the thought crosses my mind that a man like that could be pointed at a target rather than choosing one. But I have no proof of that. It's a suspicion, and I'm labeling it as one. Because the moment this kind of story stops separating what it knows from what it fears, becomes worthless. So strip out the weakest cases. Throw out 2, throw out 3, be as ruthless as you want. You are still left with a core that doesn't dissolve. The flawless on-foot disappearances at 3 of the nation's most secure sites. The wiped phone. The vanished general tied to recovered material. Gone in the exact week disclosure was moving. Those don't have innocent explanations sitting ready. And that surviving core is what we have to reckon with. So here we are, back where we started, but holding more. In the 1980s, more than 25 British defense scientists died strange deaths, and a parliament called it statistically incredible. Prime Minister called it coincidence, and the file was closed. Between 2022 and 2026, at least 11 American scientists and officials connected to classified defense, aerospace, and UAP research vanished or died, and the media called them 11 separate stories, and we were told again to call it coincidence. 2 clusters, 40 years apart, the same fields, the same kinds of people, the same bizarre repeating methods, and the same single word handed down from on high to make us stop counting. Coincidence is a claim, not an explanation. It's what you say when you don't want to look at the shape. And the shape, once you've seen it laid out end to end, does not behave like coincidence. It doesn't repeat its own methods. It doesn't clusters inside the most secretive professions on Earth. It doesn't make a congressman record a statement that he isn't suicidal. It was never 11 random tragedies. It was a pattern. The randomness was the disguise. Which leaves the only question that actually matters. If it's a pattern, who is running it and why? There are 2 doors, and I genuinely don't know which one is real. Behind the first door is the terrestrial answer, almost comforting by comparison. A foreign adversary, systematically removing the American scientists who hold the keys to next-generation propulsion, materials, and energy. The oldest game in the world, played with new targets. Behind the second door is the answer this subject has always circled. These people died, not because of who they worked for, but because of what they were about to understand. That somewhere in the overlap of anti-gravity, recovered material, and the secrets a man like McCasland carried, there is a line, and the people on this list crossed it. Ronald Reagan once stood at the United Nations and mused about how quickly the nations of Earth would set aside their differences if they faced a common threat from outside this world. People laughed, but the men and women on this list spent their careers at the exact seam where that idea stops being a speech and starts being a budget line. 11 people walked up to that seam, and one by one, the seam closed over them. The official word is coincidence. You've seen the list now, you decide.